Rain hammered the old stone bridge like 1,000 fists, the kind of storm that drowns out every sound except for the whisper that cut through the night. Not today. Those two words came from a man with soaked boots and a daughter's tiny hand clutching his own. He never expected to be anyone's hero. He was just a father trying to get his little girl to dance practice. But when he saw a homeless woman gripping the railing, ready to let the raging river swallow her whole, he couldn't walk past. What happened on that bridge didn't just stop a tragedy, it lit a spark that would rebuild a life from the ashes. Follow my story to the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind whipped across the bridge, cold enough to slice through coats, rattling the metal lamppost that flickered in protest. Ethan Cole tightened his grip on his daughter Lila's hand as they trudged across the stones slick with rain. She was only 6, her yellow boots splashing in puddles, with a cheerfulness that made the gray day less heavy. He had learned to lean on that, her innocence, her stubborn brightness, even when his own world felt heavy with fatigue. Construction shifts didn't leave much room for rest, but he had promised Lila he'd take her to practice storm, or no storm. "Daddy?" She tugged his sleeve, her voice so small against the roar of water below. "Why is that lady standing there?" The question hit Ethan before he even fully saw the woman. Then he followed his daughter's gaze and his chest tightened. A thin figure clung to the railing halfway down, the span auburn hair plastered flat by rain shoulders, trembling. She wasn't simply admiring the view. He knew it instantly. Years of scanning job sites, noticing when a scaffold swayed or a worker froze, had honed an instinct that didn't fail him now. This woman wasn't standing, she was deciding. "Stay right here, baby," he said, ushering Lila behind one of the bridge's massive stone pillars. His voice was calm, but threaded with an urgency she picked up on. Her eyes widened, lips pressing into a small line, and she obeyed without protest. Ethan's heart thudded so loud it drowned the storm as he stepped forward. The river below was no gentle creek. It had been raining for 3 straight days, turning Cedar River into a churning beast, brown water foaming and slapping against the supports, like it wanted to swallow the bridge whole. One wrong step over that railing and there would be no coming back. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his tone carrying through the downpour. "Are you all right?" She didn't turn at first. Her knuckles were white on the iron arms, trembling in a way that had nothing to do with cold. When she did glance over her shoulder, he saw eyes that should have been beautiful green flecked with gold, but rimmed red from too many sleepless nights. A woman who hadn't just lost her footing, she'd lost everything. "I'm fine," she said hoarsely, words brittle, automatic. "Just enjoying the view." Ethan let his eyes flick down at the torrent below. Violent, hungry. Not the kind of view anyone sought in weather like this. "It's rough down there today," he said, steady but gentle. "Not much of a view worth standing in the rain for." That drew a laugh from her, if it could be called that. Empty, scraped of humor, like it hurt to force air through her chest. "Rough seems appropriate." Another gust slammed across the bridge, and he noticed her body sway slightly. The tremor in her hands deepened her grip iron hard, but desperate, as if she was fighting not to let go. He realized this wasn't hesitation, it was war. A war inside her that she was losing. "I'm Ethan," he said, taking a careful step closer, palms open to show he meant no harm. "That's my daughter Lila over there." He nodded toward the pillar. Lila, peeking with round eyes, offered a tiny wave. Despite the cold, despite the rain plastering her dress against her thin frame, the woman's lips parted as she whispered back, "She's beautiful." Ethan nodded. "I'm lucky." "Lucky," the woman repeated, and her voice cracked. Tears mingled with the rain until he couldn't tell which was which. "I don't remember what that word feels like anymore." Ethan stayed quiet. Years of running crews taught him that sometimes silence carried more weight than words. She stared down at the torrent, her shoulders sagging. Then the dam broke. Words poured out, halting at first, then tumbling faster, like if she didn't say them now, she'd never get the chance. 3 weeks ago, I had everything. My husband Trevor, my little boy Jasper, 8 years old, smart, funny, wanted to be a vet one day. We weren't rich, he worked at the grain elevator, I did bookkeeping. But we were happy. Her voice grew fierce, then brittle. And then, the fire. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't have to ask. He saw it in the way her chest heaved. Trevor hadn't made it out, and I thought... She choked, clenching harder on the railing. At least I had Jasper. At least we could grieve together. But then she swallowed hard. Last week, there was an accident. The road was slick. The car slid off into a ditch. I woke up in the hospital. They said Jasper. Her voice cracked into silence. Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing against him like a physical force. He wanted to reach for her to offer something solid, but all he had were words, and words felt so small. Still, he forced them out firm as he could. No, that wasn't your fault. Accidents are cruel, but they aren't murder. Her bitter laugh cut through the storm. Insurance money from Trevor's death paid for Jasper's funeral. Can you even imagine I buried my son with my husband's life insurance? I have nothing left. No home, no job, no family. She looked down again at the furious water. There's nothing left of me. Behind the pillar, Lila's small voice rose above the storm, sweet and piercing. Daddy, she looks sad, like when Goldie went to heaven. The woman flinched, eyes shifting toward the little girl's voice. Something softened barely there, a flicker Ethan hadn't seen until now. He latched onto it, desperate. My daughter's right, Ethan said gently. You are sad, but you don't have to be alone in it. He took one more step, rain dripping from his chin. Come with us. Just for a cup of hot chocolate. There's a cafe down the street, warm and dry. Nothing fancy, but it's better than this bridge. Her grip trembled. She shook her head, whispering, I don't have money. My treat, Ethan said quickly. From one parent to another. Or maybe from someone who's been helped by strangers before to someone who needs help now. She stared at him, suspicion warring with exhaustion. Why do you care? You don't even know me. I'm nobody. Ethan's voice was low, steady. Because I've been where you are. Because my daughter's watching. And I want her to learn we don't walk away from people who are hurting. He held her gaze through the storm. Whatever you were thinking about doing tonight, not today. The river roared, the wind howled, and then at last her hands loosened from the railing. The storm had not eased, but something in the air shifted the moment her hands let go of the railing. The iron bar no longer held her prisoner. It was just wet metal beneath trembling fingers. Ethan caught that sliver of surrender, the small act of choosing to stand rather than fall. He didn't lunge at her. He knew better than to crowd someone who'd been dangling over the edge of despair. Instead, he stayed steady 2 paces away, rain dripping from his jawline boots planted like he was anchoring the whole bridge himself. Her breaths came ragged. Each inhale a battle, each exhale a surrender. Why, she whispered again, almost swallowed by the roar of the river. Why didn't you just keep walking? Most people would have. Ethan swallowed hard. Because I couldn't. Not with her watching. He tilted his head toward the stone pillar where Lila peeked her curls plastered to her forehead by the storm. She sees everything. She remembers everything, and I don't want her to remember her dad turning his back when someone needed help. The woman's eyes darted toward Lila again. For a heartbeat, the innocence of a child's gaze seemed to carry more weight than any sermon. Lila's small hand waved again, brave and unknowing, and the woman's lips trembled into something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't despair either. Ethan took the opening. What's your name? Her mouth worked as if saying it felt like opening a wound. Finally, Rachel. He nodded, letting her claim that moment. Names mattered. They tethered people back to themselves when everything else tried to strip them away. Rachel, he repeated softly as if reminding her she still existed. She clutched her arms around herself, shivering. It doesn't matter. You can't fix this. No. Ethan agreed, voice even. I can't fix it, but I can stand here, and I can listen, and I can make sure tonight doesn't end with the river taking someone else. He motioned toward the street beyond the bridge. Let's get dry, please. Rachel's laugh was hollow, but it carried less bite than before. You think a cup of cocoa is going to solve this? No, Ethan said. But it'll buy you one more day, and sometimes that's enough. The silence between them was sharp as glass. Rain smacked against the stones, the river hissed with fury. Headlights passed behind them, throwing fleeting beams of light on Rachel's gaunt face. Her eyes closed. For a terrible second, Ethan thought she'd step forward again. Then she whispered, "Not today." The words echoed his own soft but real, and relief surged through him like heat. He extended a hand, not a demand, not a rescue rope, but an offer. After a long pause, Rachel's fingers brushed his, then gripped fragile yet desperate. He guided her away from the railing back onto the safe width of the bridge. From behind the pillar came the thump, thump, thump of little boots, and suddenly Lila was there, small arms wrapping tight around Rachel's soaked coat. "You're okay," she declared with childlike certainty muffled against the woman's stomach. "Daddy said you're okay." Rachel froze, shocked by the embrace. Then, almost without realizing, her hand lowered to stroke the girl's wet curls. Her chest shuddered as if the simple warmth of a child's hug had cracked something that grief had encased in stone. Ethan cleared his throat. "Come on! There's a cafe just a block down. They've got heaters, dry seats, and the best hot chocolate in town. Lila swears by the whipped cream." Rachel glanced at him, then down at the child still clinging to her. I don't know how to walk into a place like that anymore. People look at me and see—" She trailed off, ashamed. "They'll see someone cold and wet who needs a warm drink," Ethan said firmly. "And if they see anything else, let them. You're with us." Rachel's jaw worked her pride, fighting with her exhaustion. Finally, she whispered, "All right, just for a minute." "Just for a minute," Ethan promised. They walked together, Ethan keeping his pace matched to hers, Lila skipping at their side. Rain pooled on the street, neon signs flickering against wet pavement, the whole town painted in the colors of a storm. For the first time in weeks, Rachel wasn't alone with the sound of her own footsteps. At the corner, Lila slipped her hand into Rachel's without hesitation. The woman stiffened, startled, then looked down at the tiny fingers gripping hers. Something melted. Her throat worked, voice soft. "It's been a long time since anyone held my hand." Lila grinned, missing a front tooth. "Then you needed mine." Ethan glanced sideways at Rachel. For the first time that night, he saw not just a broken stranger on a bridge, but the faint outline of a woman who might someday find her way back. They reached the glow of Mabel's cafe, its windows fogged, bell above the door chiming as Ethan pushed it open. The warmth hit them instantly. Cinnamon and coffee, replacing the smell of wet stone and storm. Rachel hesitated on the threshold, dripping on the welcome mat, like someone who wasn't sure she deserved to enter. Ethan nudged her gently. "Not today," he murmured again. She stepped inside. Warmth rushed their faces like a soft tide the second the door closed behind them. The bell above it finished chiming, and the storm became a muffled hiss against fogged glass. Mabel's cafe glowed the way a lighthouse glows in a storm. Lamps throwing amber halos over scuffed wood floors. Chalkboard letters curling at the edges. A pastry case lined with cinnamon rolls as big as fists. The radiator under the front window clanged and then settled into an even hum. It smelled like coffee and sugar and safety. Ethan shook rain from his jacket by the stand where umbrellas leaned like tired soldiers. "Table by the heater," he said, guiding Rachel gently, with a palm hovering toward her elbow, careful not to make her feel shepherded or small. Lila was already toeing off her boots, leaving 2 bright puddles in the shape of daisies. From behind the counter, a silver-haired woman with quick eyes and a polka-dot apron looked up. "Well, if it isn't Ethan Cole and his shadow," she called, voice as warm as the room. "And who's your friend, Evening?" Mabel, Ethan said. "Could we get 3 hot chocolates, extra whipped cream for hers?" He tipped his chin at Lila, who gave a shy wave over the back of a chair. "And maybe a couple of towels if it's not too much." "For you never too much," Mabel said, already pulling white mugs off a shelf. She slid a stack of clean dish towels across the counter, then lowered her voice when her eyes landed on Rachel. "Take your time, sweetheart." And she moved away with the ease of someone who knows when to hover and when to disappear. They took the booth by the large window, the vinyl seat warmed by a nearby vent. Rachel hovered before sitting as if a chair were a luxury she had to earn. Then she folded into it, shoulders curling forward, wet coat whispering against the seat. The heater breathed on her damp sleeves until steam rose like faint ghosts. Lila popped up on her knees. "Do you like marshmallows?" she asked with the blunt diplomacy of 6. "Because Mabel gives me 2 mountains of whipped cream and marshmallows on top. Daddy says it's sugar on sugar, which is not dinner, but sometimes it is." Rachel's lips tilted a motion so small it could have been a flinch. I used to put extra marshmallows in my son's cocoa. He would insist on counting them. Fairness, he'd say. What's his name? Lila asked the way children ask for a new friend's favorite color. Rachel's mouth opened and closed. Her fingers found the starch-stiff napkin worrying the edge until it feathered. Jasper, she whispered. Saying it placed something in the center of the table between them, a boy's name like a smooth stone pulled from a pocket and set carefully where everyone could see. Ethan swallowed. He didn't jump in with empathy so bright it blinded. He let the name breathe. He'd learned supervising crews that some words needed space around them, or they cracked. Mabel arrived with 3 white mugs crowned in snowdrifts of whipped cream, each topped with a dusting of cocoa. Careful, she warned, setting them down. These are hot enough to melt frost off the highway. She turned to Rachel. Sugar jars there. And if anyone gives you trouble about marshmallows, you tell them Mabel was raised on sugar and survived. A small sound that might have been a laugh escaped Rachel. Thank you, she said so soft it was nearly lost under the espresso machine's hiss. When Mabel left, Rachel cupped the mug with both hands. Heat climbed into her wrists up her forearms. Her eyes watched the steam as if it were a fortune she was afraid to spend. Ethan wrapped his own hands around his mug and said nothing. He let the clatter of plates, the murmur of other conversations, the comfortable rituals of a small-town cafe do their quiet work. Outside, the river threw itself at the pilings. Inside, a toddler banged a spoon, a teenager wiped tables with the distracted competence of someone saving for a car, and a string of twinkle lights blinked along the window like a heartbeat. Leela slurped, immediately acquiring a whipped cream mustache. Is it good? She asked Rachel proudly, showing off the foam on her upper lip. Rachel stared at the silly white smear, and her face, gaunt, rain-slick exhausted, shifted. Yes, she said, voice unsteady. It's warm. That's the point, Ethan said gently. Warm can be a plan. Rachel blinked down at the mug as if she'd never considered warmth a strategy. Her finger traced a little circle through the condensation ring on the table. The words came the way rain does when a cloud decides not to hold back anymore. My husband, she began. Trevor. He worked nights at the grain elevator just outside of town. She darted a glance at Ethan, gauging if he recognized the place. He did. Everyone did. The elevator stood at the edge of Cedar Falls like a gray cathedral, its silos shouldering the sky dust and memory caught in every seam. They said it was an electrical fault, Rachel continued, eyes fixed on the mug. One spark in that dust, he used to call it, the ghost that lives in the air, just bloomed. Her hand opened a flower aflame. He was inside when the alarms failed. Sunday morning at 3. The sirens woke me and Jasper. We drove out. I kept telling my boy it was a drill that Daddy would be standing by the road when we got there. He was 8. He believed me. He believed everything I said. Her voice thinned. Lila, who had gone still as a listening stone, slid her tiny hand across the booth seat until it touched the sleeve of Rachel's coat. The woman didn't seem to notice at first. Then she did, and the touch steadied her. When we pulled up, Rachel said the sky was orange like someone had tipped a furnace on its side. Men were shouting. The air tasted like a battery. The sheriff put his hand on my shoulder and said we needed to wait over by the trucks. He said they were doing everything they could. She stared through the glass at her own reflection, faint and wavery. A man I didn't know handed Jasper a bottle of water and told him it would help his ears not ring. He was trying to help. Everyone was. But it doesn't matter if help arrives after the moment you need it. It's like a key you drop in a storm. You can never find it in time. The cafe went on being a cafe. Plates slid onto a pass. Someone laughed 2 booths over. The bell at the door tinkled as a latecomer dripped in. The ordinariness made Rachel's story feel even heavier, because life had the indecency to continue in the same room where someone was remembering the worst night of her life. They called it, she said, each word now measured careful. Sometime after dawn, there were words about smoke inhalation and no pain, and instant. But Jasper heard only the part a child hears Daddy isn't coming. He didn't cry right away. He stood very straight, like if he moved, the new truth would move too. Later in the car, he asked if heaven needed grain. A breath broke on a small, helpless sound. I told him, heaven needs everything. Ethan felt a slow ache build behind his ribs. He didn't reach across the table. He didn't need to. Lila had both of her hands around Rachel's forearm, now the way kids try to hold a grown-up to the planet. I tried to be a bridge for my boy, Rachel said, eyes shining, across the worst of it. I made him pancakes shaped like stars, like spaceships. We watched silly videos. I told him we would say Trevor's name every day so it never went missing. I kept us moving because stillness hurt too much. Her breath trembled. Then the rain came, and kept coming. She glanced toward the fogged window. Drops tracked silver blurring the neon open sign into a soft red wound. We drove out to my father-in-law's old place a few days after the funeral. She continued, voice smaller now. Jasper wanted to see the horses. He said they might know how to carry sadness better than we do. The road out there is narrow, and when it rains, the shoulder disappears into mud, like it was never there. I was careful. I swear to you, I was careful. Her hand tightened on the mug. A curve came up, and we took it just a little too fast. Or the tires slipped. Or I blinked for a second too long. The ditch didn't look like a ditch until we were in it. Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew what grief did. It rewrote memory into a courtroom and handed you the gavel. Rachel swallowed color draining from her face, as if the details were siphoning blood. I woke up to lights so bright they scared me, and a voice asking me to stay. They told me things no one should have to be told. They used the words people have to use because there aren't better ones. They said it was quick. They said he didn't suffer. They said it wasn't my fault. And Ethan asked softly. I don't believe them, she whispered. The heater ticked. A busboy dropped a fork. The clatter made her flinch. Lila's small fingers tightened and Rachel's rigid arm finally loosened enough that she could turn her hand and hold the child's. I used Trevor's insurance to bury our son, she said, each syllable a slow bleed. There's a cruelty to numbers that way. A ledger that pretends love can be balanced, after the hospital bills stacked like bricks. I lost the apartment the week after. I walked. I walked for 2 days because it felt like if I stopped, the river inside me would spill over and drown everything near me. She drew a shaky breath and met Ethan's eyes at last. You asked why you shouldn't have kept walking on that bridge. Her mouth quirked, a fragile and crooked thing. I was counting to 3 when you spoke. That's what I decided I would do. I would count, and then I would go. You said, not today, before I got to 2. Ethan felt heat climb his throat. Then I'm glad I interrupted your math. Rachel's laugh sounded like something long-locked opening. It faded quick, leaving her hollow but not empty. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Any of it. I don't know how to come in from the rain. You just did, Ethan said. You stepped inside. You sat down. You said his name. That's a lot of weather to come through in one night. Lila nodded vigorously. And you have to try the cookies. Cookies help. Daddy says they're not medicine, but he's wrong. I am frequently wrong, Ethan said, glad for the release valve. Mabel's cookies fix most things except the county budget. As if summoned, Mabel reappeared with a plate of shortbread dusted with sugar, sliding it to the center. On the house, she said, like she always did when a table's silence wasn't the ordinary kind. She gave Rachel a look that said she could read storms at a glance. This town is smaller than its grief, but bigger than its shame. You're welcome to warm up here as long as you need. Rachel blinked fast, then picked up a cookie and broke it into 2 neat halves. She placed one before Lila with solemn ceremony. The child accepted it as if she'd been sworn into something important. Outside, the river kept raging. Inside, steam lifted off their coats like prayers you only notice in the right light. Rachel cleared her throat steadier. It started at the grain elevator, she said, eyes on Ethan, the story finding its spine. Just after midnight, when the alarms failed to sound, the cafe's light softened the hard edges of Rachel's face, but as she spoke, shadows returned, her eyes fixed on a crack in the table's varnish, as though staring into it would keep the memory from spilling out too fast. Yet the words came anyway, like sparks flying from a broken wire. It was Sunday night, she whispered. Trevor kissed me on the forehead before leaving. He smelled like sawdust and diesel. He always did. Said he'd be back by morning and that Jasper could help him wash the truck. I told him to wear his thick gloves because the air was damp, and he laughed, Said I worried too much. Her throat tightened. That was the last sound I ever heard from him, his laugh. Ethan lowered his gaze into his mug, not to avoid her, but to give her space. Lila, sensing the gravity, but not the details, leaned her chin into her hands and listened with a seriousness that made her seem older than 6. Rachel's voice dropped steady, but frayed. At 3 a.m., the phone rang. I remember thinking no good news arrives at that hour. The man on the line stuttered through words like incident and containment. I didn't wait to hear more. I grabbed Jasper from his bed, shoved his feet into sneakers without socks, and drove. The sky over the elevator looked wrong. Glowing orange pulsing. We pulled up just as the roof gave way. Her hand shook so violently she had to set down the cookie she'd been holding. There were men outside, some covered in soot, some shouting names. I screamed Trevor's until my throat bled. Nobody answered, and then the sheriff. He walked toward me, hat in hand, face pale under the firelight. That's when I knew. Before he spoke, I knew. Ethan's chest clenched. He had seen enough loss on job sites, ambulances, stretches of silence after sirens to know that look. But hearing it from her painted every detail. He reached across, not grabbing, just resting his hand close enough for her to find if she wanted. Rachel blinked hard, swallowed, and pressed on. Jasper clung to me. I told him it was a drill that his daddy would walk out any second. Kids believe what we tell them, don't they? They trust us with their whole worlds. I lied to protect him, but when the sun came up and the building was still burning, even an 8-year-old knew. The tears came, not hot, but cold, streaming down cheeks already raw from weather. We buried Trevor with borrowed suits and casseroles from neighbors. And I tried. I tried so hard to keep us upright. I made star-shaped pancakes. I read stories late into the night. But grief, it leaks. It comes out in the way you forget milk at the store or leave the laundry until it sours. Jasper would watch me trying to be strong because I couldn't be. My little boy trying to carry me. Her body curled forward, the mug clasped tight between her palms. And then came the drive. He begged to see his granddad's farm. The horses will help, he said. So I loaded him into the car even though the rain was pouring. The tires slid at a bend I thought I knew better than my own heartbeat. One moment we were talking about how horses dream, and the next, she stopped pressing her lips shut. Lila's soft voice broke the silence. Did the horses help Rachel made a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh? They never got the chance, sweetheart. Her shoulders shook. I woke up to lights and strangers, and they told me my boy was gone. They told me I didn't even get to say goodbye. I killed him. No, Ethan said, his voice iron under velvet. You didn't. That was an accident, Rachel. You didn't put him in harm's way. The road, the rain, that's not your fault. She shot him a look bitter. Isn't it? I was the driver. I had one job, keep him safe. Ethan leaned in, holding her gaze. Accidents aren't murder. They're cruel, they steal what matters most, but they're not crimes committed by love. And you loved him. I can hear it in every word you've said. Her mouth trembled. For a long moment, the cafe's hum filled the gap dishes, clinking, rain ticking against glass. Finally, Rachel whispered, He used to paint faces on rocks from the creek, dozens of them. Our windowsill was a village of pebble people. He gave one to Trevor to keep in his lunchbox. Her voice cracked. They found it in his pocket after the fire. My husband's last breath and my son's painted stone side by side. Ethan exhaled sharply, fighting his own burn behind the eyes. Beside him, Lila slid from her seat, scooted around, and climbed into Rachel's lap without permission. The move startled Rachel, but then the girl's small arms wrapped around her neck. You're sad, Lila murmured, but Daddy says hugs help. Rachel broke. The sobs came hard and shaking, her hands clutching the child as if anchoring herself against a tide. Mabel glanced from behind the counter, eyes soft, then turned back to polishing mugs, giving them privacy. Ethan let the moment breathe, watching the stranger he had pulled from a bridge dissolve under the weight she had carried too long. And yet in the center of that collapse, something else was happening. Not despair, but release. The storm in her chest was finally finding air. When Rachel's sobs slowed, she whispered into Lila's hair, You remind me of him. You're kind without even knowing you're kind. Lila pulled back, face sticky with tears not her own. My daddy makes pancakes look like butterflies. Maybe he can make some for you too. Rachel let out a ragged laugh, shaky but real. Butterflies. Jasper loved butterflies. Ethan's lips lifted relief and ache tangled together. Then it sounds like breakfast has a plan. Outside, the storm softened to a steady drizzle, streetlights shining halos in the wet. Inside, Rachel's grip loosened just enough for her to take a cookie, break it in two, and hand half to the child in her lap. For the first time that night, she wasn't clinging to the edge of anything. The cafe had grown quieter as the evening crept on. A few regulars nursed mugs near the back, the hum of conversation low enough that every word at their booth felt cocooned in privacy. Rachel sat with Lila still nestled against her cookie crumbs on the child's sweater. She seemed smaller in that moment, not fragile like glass, but like someone whose strength had been worn thin from carrying a boulder too long. "I don't know why I'm still here," Rachel murmured half to herself. "Everything that made me me is gone. Trevor Jasper, our home, it's all ashes." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Maybe, but ashes still mean there was a fire once. Something real. Something that mattered. You're still here because pieces of that fire are still burning in you. You just can't see them yet." Her eyes flashed with a mix of anger and grief. "That sounds like something people write on sympathy cards. It doesn't change the truth. I lost everything." "Maybe you did," Ethan admitted. He didn't sugarcoat. He never had. But losing everything doesn't mean you can't build something again. Trust me. I've had to pick up from nothing too. Rachel studied him as if noticing for the first time that he wasn't just playing rescuer, but speaking from his own scars. "What did you lose?" He gave a humorless laugh. "My wife, Melissa, walked out when Lila was 2, left a note that didn't explain much, just that she wasn't built for motherhood, that she wanted her freedom back." His jaw tightened. "I thought I'd failed her. Failed my little girl. For months I sat in my truck after putting Lila to bed wondering if she deserved better than me. But every morning she'd pat my cheek and say, 'Daddy pancakes,' and I realized maybe being enough didn't mean perfect. Maybe it meant staying." Rachel's expression shifted, less guarded. "But you still had her. Your daughter. I don't have anyone." "You have us tonight," Ethan said simply. "That's a start." Lila tilted her head back, grinning. "We can share our pancakes with you. Daddy makes them like blobs sometimes, but if you squint, they're butterflies." Rachel blinked, caught off guard, then laughed through her tears. The sound startled her like a foreign language her mouth had forgotten how to speak. "Butterfly pancakes. That sounds ridiculous." "Ridiculously good?" Ethan corrected with a faint smile. Silence settled again, but not the heavy silence of before. This one had warmth in it, like the cafe's heater humming nearby. Rachel sipped her hot chocolate slowly, each swallow an act of reminding herself she was still alive. She finally set the mug down, voice hoarse. "Do you know what it's like to use your husband's life insurance to bury your son? To sign papers with hands that should be holding him instead?" Every number felt like an insult. And when the last dollar was gone, so was I. I couldn't work, couldn't think. Landlord gave me 2 weeks, then tossed me out. Now I'm just walking, existing, until tonight. Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "I know what it's like to feel invisible, to believe no one's coming. But you're wrong about one thing. You're not nothing. You're Rachel. You're a woman who loved her family so fiercely that even now, broken as you feel, you still talk about them like they matter more than your pain. That doesn't sound like nothing to me." Her throat worked, tears welling again. But this time they didn't spill with hopelessness. They trembled with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. From the kitchen, Mabel appeared with a tray of fresh rolls, sliding one onto Rachel's plate. "Eat," she said firmly, not as a suggestion, but as a command given with kindness. Storms aren't fought on empty stomachs. Then she turned and bustled away. Rachel stared at the bread steam curling upward. She broke it apart slowly, like it might vanish. The first bite filled her eyes with fresh tears, not because of grief, but because of the sheer normalcy of warm food in a safe place. "I can't pay you back," she whispered. "Good," Ethan replied. "I'm not asking you to. Someone helped me once when I couldn't stand on my own. I never got to repay them. So maybe this is how it works. We don't pay back, we pay forward." Rachel's lips trembled. Why me? Out of everyone you could have stopped for, why me? Ethan's voice was low but firm. Because you were there. Because you needed someone. And because my daughter was watching. If I want her to grow up knowing we don't walk past hurting people, then I had to show her right. Lila piped up proud. That's what Daddy says, we don't walk away. Rachel closed her eyes, overwhelmed. For the first time since she'd stood on that bridge, she wasn't gripping the edge of despair. She was holding warmth, holding words, holding the small truth that maybe she wasn't entirely lost. Ethan watched her shoulders lower just slightly, like a burden had been shifted, not lifted, but moved enough for her to take a breath. Outside, the rain finally softened to a drizzle. Through the fogged windows, Cedar Falls looked gentler. Streetlights reflected on wet pavement, less like wounds and more like lanterns guiding the way. Rachel whispered again, almost inaudible, not today. And for the first time she said it as a choice, not a plea. The drizzle outside softened into a mist, blurring the edges of Cedar Falls, as if the whole town had been painted in watercolor. Inside the cafe, warmth wrapped around them like a quilt. Rachel sat with both hands cupped around her mug, as though she feared the heat might escape if she let go. For a long while she didn't speak, and Ethan didn't push her. He'd learned with construction crews and late-night fatherhood that silence could be a scaffold you held it steady until the weight someone carried could rest on it. Finally, Rachel broke the quiet. I don't deserve this, she whispered, staring at the half-eaten roll on her plate. The kindness, the hot chocolate, even your daughter's hug. I've done nothing but ruin lives. How can I accept this when I have nothing to give back? Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. His voice was steady, unflinching. You're breathing. That's enough for tonight. She let out a brittle laugh, shaking her head. Breathing isn't living. No, he agreed softly. But it's the first step. Across the table, Lila licked whipped cream from her spoon, listening with the strange attention of a child who understood more than adults realized. She piped up with simple certainty. When I fell off my bike, Daddy said to just keep breathing until the pain got smaller. Then I could try again. Rachel blinked at her, startled. And did it work? Lila nodded, proud. Yep, I got back on the bike. My knees were still bloody, but I didn't stop riding. Ethan gave a half smile. She tells it better than I do. For the first time that night, Rachel smiled a real, if fragile, curve of her lips. It looked like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, faint but undeniable. She exhaled, shoulders loosening a fraction. I've been walking for 2 days. Slept in a bus station, then under the awning at the library. I kept thinking maybe someone would notice, but people just looked through me. It's easier to pretend the broken aren't standing right in front of you. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen that same emptiness in his own reflection once sitting in his truck at midnight with a baby monitor on the seat beside him, wondering if he mattered. I noticed, he said quietly, and you're not invisible here. Rachel's gaze flicked to him, searching his face for cracks for insincerity. She found none. Slowly she nodded, as though allowing herself to believe just for tonight that his words could be true. The bell above the cafe door jingled as a young couple hurried in, shaking off rain. Their laughter filled the room briefly before they settled at a booth. Rachel flinched at the sound as if joy itself stung. Ethan caught it and shifted. You know, he said, changing tack, this place has a secret menu. Rachel arched a brow, skepticism flickering through her exhaustion. Secret menu, He gestured toward Lila. Tell her. Lila grinned wide. Butterfly pancakes. Rachel let out a disbelieving laugh, hand flying to her mouth. Pancakes. At a cafe. Not just pancakes, Ethan said, feigning seriousness. Art. Culinary masterpieces. They don't look much like butterflies, but don't tell her that. They do too, Lila protested, stomping a little boot on the seat. Sometimes. Rachel laughed again, softer this time. It wasn't the brittle sound from the bridge, but something looser, like a knot loosening in her chest. She pressed her fingers to her eyes, shaking her head. I can't remember the last time I laughed. Feels strange. Good strange, Ethan asked. Rachel lowered her hand. Her eyes were rimmed red, but something lighter lingered there. Good strange. They fell into easier conversation after that, talking about small things. about how Cedar Falls used to host a fall festival with caramel apples, about how Lila was practicing for her dance recital on Saturday. Rachel listened, really listened, nodding when Lila described her butterfly costume in vivid detail, from the glitter wings to the way she twirled until she got dizzy. "You should come," Lila said suddenly, matter of fact. "Daddy says I need people in the audience who aren't him because Daddy's always clapped too loud." Rachel's lips parted in surprise. I don't think you should," Lila interrupted firmly. "It's Saturday at 4. You can sit with Daddy." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "She doesn't take no very well." Rachel looked down at her mug, then at Lila's eager face. Something softened. Maybe she whispered, "Maybe I could." The moment held tender and fragile. Ethan felt it like a rope catching just before someone falls. When they finished their cocoa, Ethan slid out of the booth and offered his hand. Rachel hesitated, then took it. Her fingers were cold, but there was a spark of life in the grip. "Where will you go tonight?" he asked gently as they stepped toward the door. Rachel shook her head, embarrassed. "I don't know. I was going to walk until I found somewhere dry enough to close my eyes. Doesn't matter where." Ethan frowned, then glanced at Lila. "Well, you're not doing that." "Not anymore." "You're coming with us, at least until the rain lets up." Rachel stiffened, pulling her hand back. I can't impose like that." "You're not imposing," Ethan said firmly. "You're surviving, and you don't have to do it alone tonight." Lila reached for her hand again, eyes wide. "Please, we have extra blankets, and Daddy makes pancakes." Rachel looked between them, the stubborn compassion of a father and the guileless hope of a child. For the first time, the weight of her refusal seemed heavier than the weight of her yes. She nodded slowly. "Just for tonight." Ethan smiled relief in his chest. "Good. Then it's settled." As they stepped out into the drizzle, Rachel tucked her coat tighter, but the rain didn't feel as punishing as before, not when she wasn't walking into it alone. The mist hung over Cedar Falls like a veil as they stepped out of Mabel's cafe. The rain had eased into a fine drizzle, the kind that dampened hair and lashes, but carried no bite. Street lamps burned halos across the slick pavement, and shop windows reflected watery smears of neon. Rachel followed Ethan and Lila with cautious steps, like someone relearning how to walk among the living. Lila tugged her hand insistently, skipping over puddles. "Come on, it's not far. Daddy always says home is just around the corner." Rachel let herself be pulled. The child's hand was warm, steady. She glanced sideways at Ethan, who matched her pace without comment. He looked more solid than the buildings around them, broad shoulders beneath a worn jacket boots heavy against the pavement. He carried himself like a man who'd been knocked down before, but had learned to plant his feet anyway. They turned onto Willow Street, lined with modest brick apartments. Curtains glowed in a few windows, silhouettes passing inside. Rachel's chest tightened at the ordinary domesticity, the reminder of what she had lost. Ethan seemed to sense it because he said nothing, just held the front door of his building open until she and Lila stepped inside. The stairwell smelled faintly of old paint and detergent. The walls carried the scuffs of years lived in, and a potted fern drooped by the window on the landing. Rachel trailed her fingers along the wooden banister as though grounding herself. When they reached the second floor, Ethan unlocked a door with peeling brass numbers. "Welcome to our palace," he said dryly. Inside the apartment was small, but warm. The living room opened directly from the door, a couch draped with a patchwork quilt toys, scattered in colorful disarray, and a bookshelf sagging under paperbacks. A faint smell of cinnamon lingered, maybe from cookies baked days ago. It was no mansion, but it breathed of care and survival. Rachel hesitated on the threshold. Her shoes left a trail of damp footprints on the rug, and shame prickled her skin. "I shouldn't be here," she murmured. Ethan met her eyes. "You should. Sit down, take off your coat. You're safe." Lila was already kicking her boots into the corner, darting to the kitchen. "I'll get blankets," she announced. Rachel stepped inside slowly, each footfall heavy with guilt. She lowered herself onto the edge of the couch, clutching her coat around her. The hum of a heater filled the silence. Ethan disappeared into a hallway and returned with a stack of folded blankets. He handed one to her, and she resisted before finally pulling it around her shoulders. Warmth seeped into her chilled skin, loosening muscles she hadn't realized were clenched. "You don't have to thank me," Ethan said, settling into the armchair opposite. I've been in spots where a stranger's kindness kept me afloat. This is just me passing it on. Rachel stared at the frayed edge of the blanket. I don't know how to be someone worth helping anymore. You don't have to be worth it, Ethan said quietly. You just have to be here. Lila reappeared, dragging another blanket twice her size, plopping down beside Rachel. She snuggled close, her small weight pressing comfort into Rachel's side. You can sleep here, Lila said, matter-of-factly. Daddy snores sometimes, but you'll get used to it. Ethan chuckled. Thanks for selling me out, kiddo. Rachel laughed softly, a sound that surprised her. The blanket slipped further across her shoulders, and she let herself lean back into the couch. For the first time in weeks, her body wasn't braced against cold cement or hard benches. They talked little that night. Ethan busied himself in the kitchen making tea he admitted wasn't very good. Lila showed Rachel her butterfly costume twirling clumsily across the room until she toppled into giggles. Rachel watched with a pang Jasper had once twirled the same way, cape flying behind him. The memory stung, but it didn't crush her. When it grew late, Ethan set a pillow and folded blanket on the couch. It's not much, he said, but it's dry. It's safe. Rachel's throat tightened. I don't know how to thank you. Don't, Ethan said. Just rest. Lila hugged Rachel before scampering off to her room. Good night. Don't let the rain bugs bite. Rachel blinked at the odd phrase, then laughed despite herself. Good night, Lila. When the apartment settled into quiet, Rachel lay on the couch staring at the ceiling. The hum of the heater, the soft creaks of an old building, and the distant rhythm of rain outside the window blended into a lullaby. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the accident, she wasn't counting seconds toward an ending, she was letting them carry her into sleep. Ethan peeked once from the hallway, watching her shoulders rise and fall evenly beneath the blanket. Relief washed through him. She had chosen to stay another night, not today. In the dim glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds, Rachel shifted slightly, her hand brushing the fabric of the couch like she was testing its reality. A whisper escaped her lips, fragile but clear. Maybe tomorrow. Ethan stood quietly in the doorway, his heart heavy but steadied. Tomorrow was more than enough. Morning crept into the apartment, softly slipping through the blinds in pale bands of gold. The storm had passed, leaving the air damp and clean. Rachel stirred on the couch, the borrowed blanket tangled around her legs. For a moment, waking felt like surfacing from deep water. Her body braced for cold concrete or the echo of a bus station. Instead, she found warmth, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the faint sound of a little girl humming. She sat up slowly, blinking. Lila stood in the middle of the living room, her butterfly wings strapped crookedly to her pajamas, twirling with all the seriousness of a ballerina on stage. "You're awake," the child exclaimed, cheeks flushed. "Daddy's making pancakes. Want to help me count how many flips he ruins?" Rachel's lips curved in a weary smile. "I wouldn't miss it." Ethan emerged from the kitchen, spatula in hand, his hair still damp from a quick shower. "You're up. Hope you like pancakes. We don't have much else this morning." Rachel tightened the blanket around her shoulders. "I don't want to impose—" "You're not," Ethan interrupted firmly. "You're a guest. Sit. Eat. That's the rule." The words carried a gentle finality that left no room for protest. Rachel allowed herself to sink back against the couch, watching as Lila bounded into the kitchen to supervise. The smell of batter and butter filled the small apartment, mingling with the rich aroma of coffee. For the first time in weeks, Rachel felt something stir that she thought had died appetite. When Ethan brought the plates out, Lila clapped. "Butterflies," she declared. The pancakes were lumpy, some edges browned too dark, but their vague shapes resembled wings if you tilted your head. Rachel laughed a startled, honest sound. "These are—" she began. "Masterpieces." Ethan finished with mock pride. "Blobs." Lila corrected, giggling. Rachel picked up her fork and cut into one. The warmth, the sweetness of syrup, the simple act of breakfast in company, it felt almost holy. Her eyes prickled with tears, but for once they weren't just grief. They were gratitude. They ate quietly, the clink of forks filling the space. Lila recounted in vivid detail how her recital rehearsal had gone yesterday, arms flapping as she tried to imitate the dance teacher's graceful moves. Rachel listened intently, nodding, smiling at the child's enthusiasm. She caught herself leaning forward, elbows on the table like a mother listening at her own kitchen table. The realization sent a pang through her chest. After breakfast, Ethan began gathering plates. Rachel jumped up. "Let me help. You don't need to." "I want to," she insisted. He studied her for a moment, then handed her a dish towel. "All right, then." They moved together in the small kitchen, Rachel drying plates while Ethan washed. The sink's running water and clatter of utensils became a rhythm almost domestic, and Rachel felt a strange sense of normalcy bloom inside her. She hadn't touched a dish in weeks, not since before the accident. As she set the last plate in the cupboard, she whispered, "Thank you." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. "For what?" "For reminding me what mornings used to feel like." Her voice cracked. "I'd forgotten." Ethan's eyes softened. He didn't try to answer. Some things weren't meant to be patched with words. The rest of the morning passed gently. Rachel sat with Lila, coloring at the coffee table, letting the child chatter about everything from butterflies to glitter to why pancakes should be considered vegetables if they have blueberries. Rachel laughed often, though the laughter still trembled like glass. By noon, she grew restless. Standing at the window, she watched the street below. Cars passed, people hurried with umbrellas, life unfolding as if her own hadn't ended weeks ago. Guilt pressed heavy in her chest. "I should go," she said abruptly. Ethan looked up from repairing one of Lila's toy wings. "Where, I don't know," she admitted, hugging her arms. "But I can't stay here. You've done enough. More than enough." Ethan set down the toy. "Rachel, walking out into the rain again isn't strength, it's punishment. You don't deserve more punishment." Her jaw tightened. "But I don't belong here." "You belong wherever someone makes space for you," he said firmly. "And we're making space." Before she could respond, the door creaked. Mabel stepped inside, carrying a covered tray. "I knocked, but no one heard," she said cheerfully. "Brought cinnamon rolls before they disappear, and I heard from a little bird that I might be looking for help in my cafe." Rachel blinked. Helped Mabel set the tray on the table, then met Rachel's eyes. Waiting tables, nothing fancy, just serving coffee, smiling at regulars, maybe helping with the morning baking. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest. And it comes with as many cinnamon rolls as you can sneak when I'm not looking. Rachel's mouth fell open. I don't have experience. I don't even experience," Mabel scoffed. "Honey, I've been doing this 30 years. I can teach anyone to pour coffee. What I can't teach is kindness, and I've already seen you have that." Rachel froze, stunned by the offer. The idea of working again, of earning a place in the world instead of drifting through it, felt impossible and terrifying. "Why me?" she asked softly. Mabel shrugged. "Because Ethan brought you in from the rain, and I trust his judgment. Because I saw the way you listened to his little girl, and because I know when someone's ready for a second chance." Rachel's lips trembled. She looked at Ethan, then at Lila, who was already stuffing her mouth with cinnamon roll. "I don't know if I can." "You can," Ethan said gently. "One step at a time. Just like last night." "Not today." Rachel swallowed hard. For the first time in weeks, the future wasn't just a wall of darkness. It was a door cracked open, waiting. She nodded, voice shaking. "Okay, I'll try." Ethan smiled. "That's all you have to do." And as cinnamon sugar warmth filled the room, Rachel realized she had crossed another bridge, this one not of stone and rain, but of kindness and trust. The next morning, Rachel walked through the doors of Mabel's cafe, not as a stranger pulled from the rain, but as someone with a place to be. The bell jingled overhead, the smell of coffee and baked bread wrapping around her like a blanket. She clutched the strap of the borrowed bag Ethan had pressed into her hands that morning. Inside were a spare shirt and an old pair of jeans he insisted she take. They fit a little loose, but they were clean, and when she caught her reflection in the cafe's glass door, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. Mabel bustled from behind the counterflower on her apron. "Right on time," she said with an approving nod. "That's the first rule of this place. Second rule is smile when you can, even if it's only with your eyes. The regulars notice." Rachel's throat tightened. I'm not sure I remember how to." Mabel softened, resting a hand on her arm. "Then practice. It'll come back." Ethan had walked her there before heading to his construction site, Lila skipping between them like a bright thread tying them together. Rachel hadn't realized until he left how much steadier she felt with him nearby. Now, standing in the cafe's glow, she drew a slow breath and told herself one step. Just one. By mid-morning, she was wiping down tables, watching Mabel pour coffee with a flourish that turned routine into ritual. Customers came and went, farmers in mud-splattered boots, office clerks craving muffins, a pair of high school kids rehearsing lines for a play. Rachel moved quietly, but she was moving, and that was more than she had done in weeks. At one point, a man at the counter dropped his spoon, and Rachel bent to retrieve it. When she set it back before him, he looked her in the eye and said, "Thanks." Just that simple, ordinary gratitude. It hit her harder than she expected. She had forgotten what it felt like to be acknowledged. By noon, her hands ached from carrying plates, but there was a lightness in the ache. She wasn't just enduring the hours, she was earning them. When Ethan came to pick up Lila after school, the bell above the door chimed, and Rachel's heart lurched in a way she hadn't felt in years. He filled the doorway, hard hat dangling from his hand, sawdust still clinging to his jacket. Lila barreled in, wings strapped over her school clothes, announcing, "Daddy? I told everyone at school that Miss Rachel works at Mabel's now." Rachel blushed. "Miss Rachel." "That's what she called you," Ethan said with a smile. "I guess it's official." Mabel waved them toward a booth. "You two sit. Your girl's been a help. Quick learner." Rachel ducked her head, embarrassed by the praise, but Ethan caught her eye. "Told you, you've got more in you than you think." They shared a late lunch, Lila chattering about recital rehearsals and glitter catastrophes. Rachel laughed more than once, sometimes quietly, sometimes with surprise. And Ethan watched her laugh like a man witnessing spring after a long winter. As the days turned into weeks, Rachel found rhythm in the cafe's routine. Morning shifts, wiping counters, learning which customers tipped in quarters and which in stories. Mabel's steady presence became an anchor, and each evening she walked back with Ethan and Lila, sharing dinners that often involved butterfly pancakes or improvised casseroles. But even as routine took hold, Rachel's guilt still surfaced. One evening after Lila had gone to bed, she lingered at the window of Ethan's apartment, arms wrapped around herself. The streetlights reflected in her eyes. "I killed my child," she whispered, voice trembling. "I carry that with me every step. I don't know how to live past it." Ethan leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes steady. "You didn't kill anyone. You were in an accident, a terrible, cruel accident. You've been punishing yourself ever since, but Rachel Jasper wouldn't want you to stop living. Kids don't love us because we're perfect. They love us because we're theirs." Tears slid down her face, silent and raw. "But what if I'm too broken to be anything else?" Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Then let yourself be broken for now. But don't mistake broken for worthless. I know the difference because I've been there. You'll heal not all at once, not perfectly. But you will. And until then, you've got us." Rachel turned toward him, and for the first time she didn't flinch from the kindness. She let it land shaky as it was. In the bedroom down the hall, Lila's small voice floated out. "Daddy, don't forget to turn off the hall light. Ordinary words, ordinary life." Rachel clung to the sound like a rope thrown across a chasm. When Ethan returned to the living room, Rachel had whispered something so soft he almost missed it. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." He only nodded because he knew words weren't enough. But inside he felt something shift, a quiet knowing that saving her on that bridge had also saved a piece of himself. Outside, the river still ran beneath the stone bridge, but Rachel hadn't been back to its edge. Not once. By the time autumn painted the town in shades of amber and rust, Rachel had become part of the rhythm of Mabel's cafe. The bell above the door greeted her each morning as if it had been waiting for her all along. She wore an apron, now faded blue, patched at the pocket, Mabel's old spare. At first, Rachel had tied it awkwardly, fumbling with knots, but now the motion felt natural, her hands remembering what competence felt like. She learned regulars by heart. Mr. Dawson, who ordered black coffee at 6 sharp before heading to the feed store. The high school kids who piled in after class for pie and laughter. Mrs. Patel, who left Rachel sticky notes with quotes from poetry books tucked under her saucer. Each interaction was small, but it added up to something Rachel hadn't known in months: belonging. Ethan noticed the change. He'd drop in after shifts, dust still on his boots, to find Rachel laughing at something Mabel said, her shoulders less hunched, her eyes clearer. Lila would tug him toward the counter, demanding a cookie, and Rachel would slip her one with a conspiratorial wink. The sight always struck Ethan like sunlight proof that the woman he'd met on the bridge was stepping back toward life inch by inch. One Friday evening, after the cafe closed, Ethan lingered as Rachel wiped down the last table. Lila, exhausted from a long week of rehearsals, had fallen asleep in the booth, curled under a quilt Mabel kept handy for cold nights. The place was quiet except for the rattle of rain beginning again on the roof. "You're good at this," Ethan said, watching Rachel wring out a cloth. She raised an eyebrow. "At what scrubbing syrup rings?" "At being here," he replied. "At showing up. At listening. People notice." Her laugh was soft, self-deprecating. "I still wake up some mornings thinking it's a mistake that someone will tap me on the shoulder and tell me to leave." "No one's tapping you," Ethan said firmly. "This is your place now, too." Rachel leaned against the counter, gripping the rag. Sometimes I catch myself forgetting how heavy it all is. I'll laugh at something Lila says, or I'll smile when Mr. Dawson tells one of his awful jokes, and for a moment I don't feel the weight. And then the guilt comes crashing back, like I've betrayed them, Trevor Jasper, by daring to feel okay. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That isn't betrayal. That's survival. Loving them doesn't mean drowning with them. It means carrying them forward while you keep breathing." Her eyes shimmered. She looked at him like he was handing her something precious, something she wasn't sure she was allowed to hold. "And what if I'm not strong enough?" He held her gaze. "Then lean on someone else until you are. That's what people are for." Rachel exhaled shakily, nodding. She glanced toward the booth where Lila slept, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily under the quilt. She saved me, you know, that night on the bridge. Her voice. It reached me when nothing else could. Ethan's throat tightened. "She has that effect." Rachel smiled faintly. "She reminds me of Jasper. The way kids just believe. Believe in cookies fixing sadness. Believe in costumes making them heroes. I thought I'd never feel that kind of light again. But then she held my hand and I realized maybe the world wasn't finished with me." For a moment, silence stretched between them, full but not empty. Then Lila stirred in the booth, mumbling about butterflies, and both adults smiled. They walked home together, Rachel carrying the sleeping child in her arms, while Ethan balanced the umbrella above them. The rain pattered steadily, softer than the storm that had first brought them together. Rachel's steps felt sure, not dragged by despair, but guided by purpose. Later that night, after Lila was tucked in, Rachel stood by the window of the apartment. The street glistened below lamplight, reflecting off wet pavement. Ethan joined her, leaning a shoulder against the frame. "You've come a long way from that bridge," he said quietly. She nodded, tears prickling her eyes, not from grief this time, but from the strangeness of gratitude. "Because you didn't walk past me." Ethan shook his head. "Because you chose to listen, to stay." Rachel closed her eyes, hearing again the roar of the river, the hiss of rain, and Ethan's voice cutting through it. "Not today." She whispered it now, a mantra, a promise. "Not today." The words no longer felt like defiance against death. They felt like an invitation to life. October's chill settled over Cedar Falls, scattering leaves across the sidewalks in swirls of red and gold. At Mabel's cafe, the heater clanged to life each morning, and Rachel found herself moving with an ease she hadn't known in years. The customers knew her by name now, a nod here, a smile there. It wasn't pity she saw in their faces, but recognition. She was no longer the woman invisible on the streets. She was Rachel, the one who remembered Mr. Dawson liked exactly 2 sugars, the one who saved the last slice of pecan pie for the sheriff who came in late on Thursdays. Yet even as her hands grew surer, balancing trays and refilling mugs, the ache of guilt lingered beneath the surface like a bruise. She carried it with her every day, tucked beneath the apron strings. And some nights when the cafe closed and the town quieted, it broke through. One of those nights, Rachel sat at Ethan's kitchen table long after Lila had gone to bed, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. A half-empty mug of tea cooled between her hands. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "You're somewhere else tonight," he said gently. Rachel's voice was low, thick. "I keep seeing him. Jasper. The way he laughed when he painted faces on rocks, how serious he looked in his Superman cape. And then I see the ditch, the rain, the way the paramedic shook his head before I could even ask. It replays over and over like I'm being punished." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not punishment. That's grief, Rachel. It loops. It gnaws. But it doesn't mean you're guilty." She lifted her eyes, tears shimmering. "But I was driving. I was supposed to protect him." "You were protecting him," Ethan said firmly. "Every day in every way you could. You cooked. You read to him. You carried his grief alongside yours. That one night, Rachel, no one could have stopped the rain, the road, the slide. You didn't fail him. The world failed both of you." Her breath hitched, tears sliding unchecked. "How do you live with that kind of hole, with knowing you'll never hear his laugh again?" Ethan looked down at his hands, rough from years of work. "You don't fill the hole. You build around it. You let it shape you without letting it define you. That's how I got through when Melissa left. Every time I thought I was drowning, I looked at Lila and remembered she still needed me to swim." Rachel pressed her palms to her face, trembling. "But Jasper isn't here to need me." "No," Ethan said softly. "But maybe someone else does. Maybe you haven't seen it yet. But you will." The words hung between them heavier than the storm that once raged on the bridge. Rachel lowered her hands slowly, eyes raw, and whispered, "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You don't have to be," Ethan replied. "Not all at once. Lean on us. On me. On Lila. Let us carry you until you can stand." For a long moment, Rachel stared at him, searching for cracks for pity. What she found instead was steadiness. A man who had his own wounds but stood solid anyway. A man who hadn't walked away. Her tears shifted, no longer sharp with despair but soft with release. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his. It was the lightest touch, but Ethan covered it with his calloused palm and held it steady. From the hallway, a small voice broke the silence. "Daddy." They both turned. Lila stood there in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, a stuffed bunny, dangling from one hand. "I had a bad dream." Ethan rose immediately, scooping her up. "What kind of dream bug?" She buried her face in his neck. It was raining and the bridge was scary, but then Miss Rachel was there, and it wasn't scary anymore. Rachel's breath caught. She pressed her hand to her mouth, stunned. Ethan looked at her over Lila's hair, eyes saying everything he didn't put into words. "See," he murmured to his daughter. "Not scary anymore." Lila nodded sleepily. "Because she stayed." The child's simple declaration cut deeper than any sermon. Rachel felt something shift in her chest, a piece of grief making room for something else, something that looked dangerously like hope. Later, after Ethan carried Lila back to bed, Rachel remained at the table, staring at her empty mug. Her reflection wavered in the cold tea, a face still lined with sorrow, but no longer defined by it. For the first time since the accident, she wondered if maybe she could be more than the sum of her losses. The wind outside rattled the windows, but inside the apartment it felt steady, safe. Rachel whispered to herself, barely audible, "Not today." And for the first time she believed it. Snow had arrived early in Cedar Falls, frosting rooftops and softening every edge of the small town. The river under the stone bridge no longer roared. It moved heavy and dark, thin layers of ice forming along the edges. For Rachel, the days had taken on a new rhythm. Morning shifts at the cafe. Afternoons sometimes spent helping Lila rehearse for her recital or curling up in Ethan's apartment with a borrowed book. Nights that no longer stretched endlessly but settled into rest. But the grief was never gone. It weighed heavy as the snow piled on the branches outside. One evening, while Ethan was repairing a drawer that stuck in the kitchen, Rachel sat on the couch, hands trembling around a mug of tea. Her voice broke the quiet. "I killed my own child." She whispered words so raw they made Ethan still his hammer mid-swing. He turned slowly, eyes steady on her. "Rachel, no, don't do that to yourself." Her throat tightened. "But I was driving. He trusted me, and I failed him." What kind of mother loses her son like that? Ethan set down the tool, wiping his hands on a rag as he crossed the room. He sat opposite her, his voice firm. A human one. One who loved him. One who would have traded places in a heartbeat if she could. Rachel, accidents happen. They don't care who you are or how much you love. You didn't kill Jasper any more than Trevor killed himself by going to work that night. Her face crumpled. But the guilt, it's all I have left of them. If I let it go, what's left? Love, Ethan said softly. The kind that doesn't die with them. The kind that you carry forward. Rachel shook her head, sobs breaking free. I don't know how. Ethan leaned forward, his hand hovering before he finally rested it gently over hers. You don't have to know. You just have to keep showing up, one day at a time, one step at a time. And when you can't lean on us. Her tears fell freely, but they were different now, not the desperate kind of a woman standing on a bridge, but the cleansing kind of someone finally allowing herself to grieve. She clutched his hand, holding on as though it anchored her to the present. From the hallway, Lila appeared again this time, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. Daddy. Her little voice trembled. Ethan opened his arm and she hurried over, crawling onto his lap. She peered at Rachel, her brow furrowed with childlike wisdom. Are you sad again? Rachel swallowed hard. Yes, sweetheart, very sad. Lila tilted her head, thoughtful. When Daddy was sad about Mommy, he made butterfly pancakes until he laughed again. Maybe you can try that too. Despite the tears, Rachel let out a fragile laugh. Butterfly pancakes, huh? They work? Lila insisted, nodding solemnly. Rachel wiped her cheeks, looking at Ethan. He smiled faintly, his eyes warm. She's not wrong. The three of them sat there, wrapped in the glow of the small lamp, the snow falling silently outside. Rachel whispered almost to herself, Jasper loved butterflies. Then maybe he's sending you a message, Ethan said. That night, after Lila was asleep, Rachel helped Ethan in the kitchen. He handed her the mixing bowl while he worked the griddle. The first pancake came out lopsided, the second burnt at the edge, but by the third, something resembling wings took shape. Rachel laughed, really laughed, and the sound filled the small apartment with something brighter than any light bulb. You're better at this than I am, Ethan admitted. Rachel shook her head, smiling through lingering tears. No, but maybe I'm ready to try. She took a bite, syrup dripping down her fork, and for the first time in months, she felt not just alive, but present. Every detail, the smell of batter, the hiss of the griddle, the warmth of Ethan's quiet smile rooted her firmly in the moment. Later, as she lay under the borrowed blanket on the couch, Rachel whispered into the dark. Not today. And this time she meant not just survival, she meant living. The weeks that followed carried Rachel into a new season of her life. The snow deepened outside, but inside the cafe and Ethan's small apartment warmth wrapped around her like a lifeline. Mabel's apron became hers, tied each morning without hesitation. Customers began greeting her with familiarity. Morning Rachel, or save me a muffin, will you, as though she'd always been part of the rhythm of Cedar Falls. Ethan watched the change with quiet pride. He'd catch glimpses of her laughing with Lila over glitter catastrophes, or wiping her hands on a towel as she carried plates with confidence. She was still carrying grief, yes, but it no longer consumed her entire frame. It lived in her softer now, a scar, instead of an open wound. One evening after dinner, Rachel lingered by the window, watching the snow fall heavy and silent. Lila sprawled on the rug, coloring pictures of butterflies and superheroes. Ethan joined her at the window, leaning a shoulder against the frame. You seem lighter, he said gently. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Some days are better. Some days I wake up and don't feel the crushing weight first thing. That's new. Her voice softened. But then it comes back and I feel guilty for letting it go even for an hour. Ethan turned toward her, his eyes steady. Grief doesn't go away. It comes in waves. But letting yourself breathe in between isn't betrayal. It's survival. Her throat tightened. Sometimes I think, if Jasper saw me smile again, he'd think I'd forgotten him. Ethan shook his head firmly. No child thinks that. They want us to be happy even when they're gone. Love doesn't end with them, Rachel. It keeps moving through us. She looked at him, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. How do you know? Because Lila asks about her mom. Sometimes, he admitted quietly. And when I laugh or cook with her, I used to feel guilty, like I was disrespecting Melissa's memory. But then I realized Lila needs me whole, not broken. I think Jasper would want the same for you. Rachel closed her eyes, letting his words sink deep. When she opened them, the snow outside had thickened, covering everything in white. A world blanketed clean, even if only on the surface. That weekend, Lila insisted on making cookies. The kitchen turned into chaos, flour dusted across counters, chocolate chips scattered like confetti. Rachel found herself laughing as Lila dumped half the bag into the bowl. Subtlety is not her strength, Ethan joked, trying to salvage the recipe. Rachel rolled dough into lopsided balls, her hands remembering the muscle memory of home. When the first tray came out of the oven, golden and steaming, she nearly cried at the smell. She hadn't baked since before the fire. "Try one," Lila urged, holding out a cookie. Rachel bit into it. The chocolate still melted and tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. "He loved cookies," she whispered. "Jasper. He'd eat them hot even if they burned his mouth." Ethan set down the spatula, watching her carefully. "Then tonight he's here with us." Rachel nodded through tears, and for once, the memory felt less like a knife and more like a blessing. Later that night, after Lila was asleep, Rachel and Ethan sat at the table with mugs of coffee. She traced the rim of hers, hesitant. "Sometimes I wonder if I was meant to survive that crash. If I'm supposed to do something with what's left of me." Ethan leaned forward. "Maybe you are. Maybe you're meant to take all that pain and turn it into something that helps someone else." Her brow furrowed. "But how?" He shrugged. "I don't know yet. But I know you have a gift. You listen. You feel everything deeply. That matters." Rachel studied him, the warmth in his eyes, the steadiness of his presence. "You really believe that I do?" The room fell quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but brimming with possibility. Outside, the snow continued falling, blanketing the world in silence. Rachel whispered more to herself than him. Not today. Not tomorrow either. For the first time since the night on the bridge, she believed the words carried her forward, not just one day at a time, but into something resembling a future. Spring came slowly to Cedar Falls. The river swelled with thawbirds returned to the trees, and storefronts pushed open their doors to let in the warmer air. For Rachel, it meant mornings no longer filled with the sharp bite of frost on her walk to the cafe, but the smell of wet earth and the faint promise of green. Life was creeping back into the world, and in its own way, into her. She had become part of Ethan and Lila's orbit now. Dinners together weren't exceptions anymore. They were routine. Sometimes casseroles thrown together from pantry scraps, sometimes pancakes shaped like butterflies, when Lila begged hard enough. And sometimes Rachel contributed fresh bread baked with hesitant hands recipes she thought she had lost to grief but found herself remembering. But no matter how far she'd come, guilt lingered, an unwelcome guest. One evening after dinner, as Lila played with paper wings on the floor, Rachel lingered in the kitchen with Ethan drying dishes while he washed. The water ran warm over his hands, steam fogging the small window above the sink. "Ethan," she said suddenly, her voice raw. "I killed my child." The plate in his hand stilled. He set it carefully in the rack before turning to her. "Rachel." "No." She cut in, gripping the towel tight. "That's what people don't say. They call it tragedy. They say accident. But I was the one behind the wheel. I drove us into that ditch. I lived, and he didn't." Her eyes brimmed. "How can I ever be anything but the woman who failed her son?" Ethan dried his hands and faced her fully, his jaw set, but his voice steady. "Rachel, listen to me. You didn't kill Jasper. You were a mother taking her son to see something he loved. The road, the storm, those things stole him from you. Not your love, not your choice. If you blame yourself for that, you're punishing the wrong person." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But if I let go of the guilt, I feel like I'm letting go of him." "You're not," Ethan said firmly. "You're holding him differently, carrying him in the laughter you let yourself have again, in the cookies you bake with Lila. In every child you'll one day help by telling them they're not alone." Rachel froze, startled. "Children." "I'll help." Ethan nodded slowly. "You've been through hell, Rachel. You know what loss feels like. That makes you someone who can guide others out of it. You have a strength most people don't. You just don't see it yet. Her lips parted, trembling. But what if I'm too broken? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then let yourself be broken. Healing doesn't mean pretending the cracks aren't there. It means learning that light can still come through them. She stared at him, silent tears streaming. Something inside her shifted, not a sudden miracle, but the beginning of a different way of seeing herself. At that moment, Lila looked up from the floor, cookie crumbs around her mouth. Miss Rachel, she announced, you can't be broken. Broken things don't laugh. And you laugh at Daddy's bad jokes. The simplicity of it broke the tension. Rachel let out a laugh through her tears, shaky but real. Ethan grinned, ruffling his daughter's hair. She's got a point. Rachel wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, whispering, maybe. Later that night, as she lay on the couch beneath the quilt, Rachel thought about Ethan's words, about Jasper's name written in cookies and pancakes and laughter, about the possibility of helping others carry grief. For the first time, she imagined a future where her pain could mean something more than suffering. She closed her eyes, whispering into the quiet, not today. This time it wasn't about refusing an ending. It was about allowing a beginning. The thaw gave way to full spring, and Cedar Falls bloomed again. Flower boxes sprouted outside shop windows, the bridge no longer a place of storm, but of daffodils pushing through cracks in the stone. Rachel's life was slowly mirroring the season still marked with shadows. Yes, but warmed by new growth she hadn't thought possible. At Mabel's cafe, she had become more than an extra set of hands. Customers asked for her by name, left notes of thanks on napkins, and lingered to share stories they didn't tell anyone else. She had discovered something she hadn't known. She carried the ability to listen so deeply that people felt lighter just for having spoken. Mabel noticed it too. One afternoon, wiping down the counter, she said, "You've got a gift, Rachel. Not everyone can sit with someone's sorrow and not flinch." Rachel blinked, stunned. "I'm just doing what people did for me." Mabel shook her head. "No, sweetheart, you're doing more. You're turning your pain into something useful. That's rare." The words stayed with Rachel. That night at Ethan's apartment, she found herself voicing the thought that had been building quietly inside. "Maybe I should do something with this," she said as Ethan packed Lila's school bag for the next day. He glanced up. "With what?" "With grief. With what I've lived through. Maybe I could help people like me. People who feel like the river's the only answer," her voice faltered. "Is that crazy?" Ethan set the bag down, crossing to where she sat. "Not crazy. Brave. You've walked through something most people can't imagine. If you can use that to pull someone else back, then Jasper's love lives on through you." Rachel's eyes stung. "But I'm no counselor. I don't know where to start." "You start the way you did with me," and Lila, Ethan said gently. "By showing up. By saying not today. One step at a time." The next week, Rachel took that step. She enrolled in evening classes at the community center, introductory training in grief counseling. The first night, she sat in a circle of strangers, heart-hammering, convinced she didn't belong. But when her turn came to speak, she told them about Jasper's rocks, about the night on the bridge, about the words that had pulled her back. When she finished, no one looked at her with pity. They looked at her with respect. Each week she returned. She learned the language of empathy, the techniques of listening, the boundaries between sharing and saving. It wasn't easy sometimes, the stories cut too close, opening wounds she thought had healed. But Ethan was always there afterward, walking her home, letting her talk, or letting her stay quiet. One night after class, she found Lila waiting up with a picture she had drawn, 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow, with butterflies filling the sky. "It's us," Lila explained proudly. "Daddy, me, and you." Rachel's throat closed. "Me?" "Of course," Lila said simply, as if it had never been in question. Ethan watched Rachel's reaction from the doorway, his eyes soft. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. From that moment, Rachel stopped calling herself a guest in their lives. She wasn't just passing through anymore. She was part of the picture, however messy, however new. At the cafe, she found herself encouraging customers in ways she hadn't before. A widow, who always sat by the window, began opening up about her late husband. A young man confessed he was thinking of leaving town after a breakup, and Rachel told him about the strength it took just to stay. Each conversation was a thread weaving Rachel back into the fabric of life. One evening, Ethan caught her standing by the cafe door after closing, staring out at the bridge in the distance. "Thinking about that night?" he asked. Rachel nodded slowly. "I used to see it as the end. Now, maybe it was the beginning." Ethan's voice was low, steady. Not maybe. It was. Rachel turned to him, and for once the weight in her eyes wasn't only sorrow, it was purpose. Summer came to Cedar Falls with the smell of cut grass and the hum of cicadas. By then Rachel had been walking a path she never imagined for herself, balancing mornings at the cafe with evenings at the community center. Each step forward was stitched with doubt, but each time she wanted to quit, she remembered Ethan's words, "Not today." The counseling program asked her to dig deep into her own grief. At first, it nearly broke her standing in front of strangers recounting Trevor's laugh, Jasper's painted rocks, the screech of tires in the rain. But instead of shattering, she found herself stronger with each retelling. Her pain became a bridge others could walk across. Ethan and Lila never missed a milestone. When she finished her first presentation, they were waiting outside the classroom with flowers picked from a neighbor's yard. When she passed a midterm exam, Lila made a butterfly-shaped card with glitter that clung to Rachel's hands for days. 6 months after the night on the bridge, Rachel stood in the community center auditorium dressed in a simple navy dress. The rows of folding chairs were filled with classmates, family, and friends. Ethan sat in the front row, Lila bouncing on his lap butterfly hair clip, holding back her curls. The director called Rachel's name. She walked across the stage, heart pounding, and accepted her certificate in grief counseling. For a moment, applause filled her ears, but what steadied her was the sight of Ethan and Lila clapping hardest, their faces lit with pride. As she turned to face the audience, she felt the weight of her journey. Just months ago, she had stood on a bridge convinced her life had ended. Now she stood on another kind of bridge, a threshold into purpose. That night they celebrated with milkshakes at Mabel's cafe, even though it was long past closing. Mabel herself insisted, flipping the open sign back for the occasion. "For our girl," she said, sliding a sundae in front of Rachel. Rachel laughed, embarrassed. "I didn't do this alone." "No one ever does," Mabel replied. Later, as they walked home under the glow of streetlights, Rachel looked at Ethan. "I never thought I'd see this day." He gave her a half smile. "I did." She frowned playfully. "You're too sure of yourself." "Not sure of me," he corrected. "Sure of you." Her chest tightened. She looked away, blinking at the night sky. For so long she had believed she was nothing but broken glass. Now she realized she was becoming something else, something whole, though still scarred. In the weeks that followed, Rachel began working part-time at a new grief counseling center downtown. She poured coffee for widows who came just to sit in silence, held hands with parents who had buried children, listened to teenagers stumbling through loss for the first time. She didn't have to imagine their pain, she carried her own. And because of that, her words weren't pity. They were proof that survival was possible. At the cafe, regulars teased that Rachel had 2 jobs now, but everyone saw the pride in her eyes. Even her laughter had changed. It wasn't tentative anymore. It rang clear like church bells after a storm. One evening, as she walked past the old stone bridge on her way home from the center, Rachel paused. The river moved lazily beneath, reflecting the sunset. She rested her hand on the railing, the same railing she had once gripped with white knuckles. But now, instead of despair, she felt gratitude. Ethan's voice came from behind her, Lila skipping at his side. "Thought I'd find you here." Rachel smiled softly. "It doesn't haunt me anymore." Ethan glanced at the water. "What does it feel like now?" Rachel exhaled, her hand lifting from the stone, like the place where everything began again. Lila took both their hands, swinging them as she skipped. "Come on, pancakes, before bedtime." Rachel laughed, letting herself be pulled forward. The bridge no longer felt like an edge, it felt like a doorway. By autumn, the leaves in Cedar Falls had turned gold and scarlet, carpeting the sidewalks in crunching layers. Life had settled into a rhythm Rachel barely recognized as her own. Mornings at the cafe, afternoons at the counseling center, evenings with Ethan and Lila, it was a life built from ashes, but alive all the same. One evening, Rachel hosted a small support circle in the counseling center's back room. 6 chairs, 1 worn rug, a pot of tea that never seemed to empty. Tonight, a young mother clutched a folded blanket to her chest, trembling. He was only 3, she whispered. I don't know how to keep breathing. Rachel leaned forward, her voice low and steady. I know that weight. I've carried it. And I won't lie, it doesn't vanish. But one day you'll laugh again without guilt. You'll tell a story about him, and it'll hurt and heal at the same time. That's how love keeps living. The woman's shoulders shook, but she nodded. Across the circle, an older man dabbed his eyes. She's right. I've seen it too. When the meeting ended, Rachel lingered alone in the quiet room. The smell of tea leaves hung in the air. She pressed her hand against her heart, whispering, Jasper, your life keeps working through mine. That night, Ethan picked her up. The drive back was quiet, Lila asleep in the back seat with her butterfly toy clutched to her chest. Rachel turned to him. Do you ever feel like we've been given more than we deserve? Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Every day. But maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's about what we do with it. Rachel's throat tightened. You saved me that night. He glanced at her. No. You chose to stay. I just happened to be standing there. The simplicity of his words stayed with her. A week later, the town held its fall festival. Pumpkins lined Main Street, string lights glowing above the booths. Children darted through crowds with caramel apples and painted faces. Rachel walked alongside Ethan and Lila, laughter curling into the crisp air. At one booth, a local artist displayed paintings. One canvas stopped Rachel cold, a watercolor of the stone bridge bathed in twilight butterflies rising above it. She stepped closer, heart pounding. The artist smiled. Painted that after hearing a story, a woman who nearly ended her life there, but didn't. They say she found her way back. Rachel swallowed hard fingers, brushing the canvas frame. She didn't buy it, but she carried the image in her mind all night. Back at Ethan's apartment, after Lila tumbled into bed, Rachel sat on the balcony with him. The town glowed faintly in the distance. Do you ever think, she said softly, that the worst moment of your life can become the seed of the best? Ethan sipped his coffee, then looked at her. I think you're proving that every day. Silence lingered between them, but not the heavy kind. This silence was full brimming with what neither dared speak yet. Finally, Rachel whispered, I don't know if I can ever be what you and Lila deserve. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes steady. Rachel, you already are. Her breath caught, but before she could answer, Lila's sleepy voice drifted from inside. Daddy, Miss Rachel, don't stay up too late. They laughed quietly, the tension easing. Rachel stood brushing her hair from her face. She felt the night air cool on her skin, and for the first time she realized she wasn't afraid of tomorrow anymore. The bridge had once been her end. Now it was her beginning. And she wasn't walking it alone. Winter returned to Cedar Falls with the first hush of snow drifting down on the lampposts. The bridge lay quiet under a white blanket, no longer a place of endings but of remembrance. Rachel had walked past it many times that season, each time whispering a quiet thank you into the air, as if the stones themselves held her story. By then her work at the Grief Center had become more than a job. Families sought her out, not because she had answers, but because she carried the same scars they bore. She offered tea silence, and sometimes the simple sentence that had saved her. Not today. Word spread that Rachel Daniels, once the woman nearly lost to the river, was now saving others from its pull. At the cafe, Mabel often teased, I'll lose you to bigger things one day. Rachel would only smile and shake her head. I'll never stop serving coffee here. It reminds me where I started. But in truth, Rachel had grown into something she never expected, a woman with purpose. And that purpose intertwined with Ethan and Lila until the three of them were no longer separate threads, but one fabric. On Christmas Eve, snowflakes swirled outside the windows of Ethan's apartment. Lila buzzed with excitement, arranging cookies for Santa, then collapsing into bed in a pile of blankets. When the child's soft snores filled the quiet, Rachel and Ethan found themselves alone by the tree. The lights reflected off Rachel's face, catching the shimmer of tears she hadn't meant to shed. It still feels like a dream, she whispered. Ethan reached across, taking her hand. What does that I get to be here? That I get to live? His thumb brushed against her knuckles. It's no dream. You fought for this. You chose it. Her gaze dropped to the floor. And you, her voice faltered. You were the one who pulled me back. He shook his head. No, Rachel. You were the one who walked forward. I just said 2 words. Their eyes met, and in that moment no more words were needed. Ethan leaned forward, and the kiss they shared was not of desperate rescue, but of quiet, steady love. It was a promise unspoken, but undeniable. When morning came, Lila squealed over presents, but the greatest gift had already been opened. They were a family not bound by blood, but by survival hope and love forged on the edge of despair. Months later, Rachel stood at the bridge again, not alone, but with Ethan's arm around her and Lila's small hand in hers. They had come to leave a wreath of wildflowers for Jasper, setting it gently against the railing. Butterflies painted on small wooden stones by Lila's class were tucked into the bouquet. Rachel closed her eyes, letting the wind lift her hair. Jasper. I promise your love didn't end here. It carried me forward, and because of that, I'll keep carrying others. The river moved steadily below, no longer dark and menacing, but alive and endless. Ethan kissed her temple. Come on, we've got a life to get back to. Rachel turned, taking his hand, and together with Lila, they walked away from the bridge, not toward endings, but toward all the beginnings still ahead. The story that had nearly ended on cold stone had become something else entirely, a testament that even in the darkest moments someone can whisper, "Not today," and that whisper can echo into forever. Word count 1, 247. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.